Sebastien Lecornu is about to explain what he has decided to do to try to break the budget deadlock. He is about to speak. We will join him live now.
Tell you rather how we can provide a budget to France, the timetable, after several days of constitutional debate. I made a number of commitments back in September, October, indeed all the way to December. I wanted to provide France with a budget in due time, that is, prior to 31 December. Well, we were not able to meet that timetable, at least as far as the state budget is concerned. The social budget is another matter. I'll get back to that in a moment. We wanted the budget to hit a maximum 5% deficit. Now it stands at 5.4%, but we were at upwards of 6% in 2024. So we have international commitments, we have commitments vis-à-vis our European partners, and this engages the very credibility of France's signature. We have to keep our word and stick to below 5%. On a more political and personal basis, I made a commitment. Indeed, this was a wager. I believe that after 2 votes of no confidence against the government, we had to govern differently. We had to share powers with local authorities. And indeed, a number of initiatives were made regarding decentralization with also social partners. There were tense labor situations back in the fall. There were union movements, there was industrial action that was difficult to manage. There were interventions from the far left as well. And, well, of course, a lot of these movements were completely disaligned with political reality. I mean, there was a new balance within the National Assembly, and we had to govern differently. Well, that was well, as I said, it was a wager. I felt that Parliament had to go all the way through the process, debates, votes, amendments, to arrive at a point of clarity. We shouldn't always blame others, not knowing who votes for what, who defends what convictions, what beliefs. Now, that way of doing things worked for the budget for the Social Security system, but at the National Assembly, that debate occurred within peace of mind, quiet, constructive debate, and indeed we're looking at 350 hours of debate since the beginning. This is huge. And plus, of course, hours behind the scenes for most meetings. And so we arrived at a first option and then a final budget that was voted for the Social Security system. And we drew a number of lessons. We learned from the previous governments of François Bayrou and Michel Barnier, the previous governments, because there were items of compromise, and sometimes we had to start Parliament debates with these options of compromise. For the state budget, things went well up until Christmas, but then things went wrong after Christmas. There was a clear divide between the upper and lower house. There was a joint committee that met for, 40 minutes. That gave you an idea of the ambiance. And of course, ministers don't sit on that committee. There were sessions between political leaders and ministers. We thought there was a way out. There were new debates in the National Assembly, but again, positions became tighter. There were attempts of pressure and sabotage, indeed, from La France Insoumise, the far-left party, and then a number of political leaders had decided to leave the debate. Up until then, they had agreed to go on with a constructive debate. The communists and the ecologists, they initially started to work with us, but then for reasons that are, their reasons, I respect their decision, but I don't understand this, they decided to walk out of these meetings. And so things got into a quagmire of sorts, bogged down. And that was a rather peculiar situation. Here we have a government that wanted debates to go to their logical conclusion, the final conclusion, and parliamentarians decided against. decided they should not continue with the debate. And so, together with our ministers last week, we had basically 4 options on the table. Number 1, not to change the strategy, just remain stubborn. Some said that. We said, well, we won't go through this parliamentary process. We need to have a vote at the end, i.e. have a sort of a shuttle diplomacy between the Senate and the National Assembly, i.e. sent a bill to the Senate, it going back to the National Assembly, and at the end of this long process, and public opinion was there to witness, it was called to witness, saying that, well, maybe at the end of that long process, maybe we might arrive at a budget, maybe in May or April, probably not within a 5% deficit. No, and here I have to be blunt. I thought about that. But because we wanted a budget quickly and we wanted to remain below 5% deficit, and of course, in my position as previous defense minister, I was really very much concerned about the budget situation because we have an international situation here. And so that road was probably not the right one because it would simply show stubbornness. The second option is no budget at all. And some actors of the chaos, we're trying to avoid chaos, of course, but some people might actually fancy that. And some will say that this special law, that is the emergency budget, can be a regular budget. That's lying to the French people. But of course, we would be caught up by the truth, and we would see this in terms of taxes and public procurement, and indeed France's position abroad. So, presenting the emergency budget as a lasting situation is absurd, and we won't do that, of course. And I made sure I talked to all political groups on the National Assembly, including the opposition, trying to remain constructive. And of course, we still want to defend the national interest. Well, political parties, no, we can't have that. We need an actual budget. Indeed, some political parties that publicly walked out of the debate said, no, we can't go that way. So that leaves us with just 2 final options. And that was part of the, provided for in the initial 1958 Constitution, either ordinance, the government decree, or Article 49.3 of the Constitution. But that provided, of course, we needed to have all the wherewithal for this to happen. And so, having given the matter due thought, and I must say, in a personal capacity, and I must say there's some bitterness this, but I will call for a vote of confidence on the matter of the on the income part of the budget. Now, I do this reluctantly because it means I have to go back on my word, but to stick to my word, I would have to be, as I said, stubborn. And that is the one thing I do not wish to do. Not for egoistic reasons. I do not want to remain stubbornly on that position. We need to find lines of compromise. We need to work as seriously as possible. We have to keep government as far away as possible from anticipated presidential elections, and avoid the sort of chaos that some parties relish. And I've heard this on TV and elsewhere. If I remain too stubbornly close to my initial positions, I would be the cause of problem. Now, some political parties, even though they ran for the general elections and they wanted a budget, well, they decided not to take part in the debate. You can very well vote against, but it doesn't mean you should make sabotage operations. And there were operations of sabotage. And we found with the number of ministers that it seemed that no rules held anymore. Now, just because you call for a vote of confidence doesn't mean we don't want compromise and we don't want debate. And that is indeed the reason why last week, starting on Friday, I started to come up with the final version. of a draft budget, but having learned the lessons from the Social Security budget, which is a budget covering a number of provisos, but for youth, for entire industries facing crises, and in particular for the housing industry, but indeed regarding people working or future workers, students, we needed to improve on the initial draft. And I would like to thank my ministers, because the many weeks of thought bore fruition. We were able to find what we could and what we could not agree to, what were the new red lines. And indeed, there were budget debates. Indeed, some choices might have dangerously harmed our production tools. But here we stuck to our guns. There were items that were open to discussion and others where we held firm, and we would hold firm. And indeed, there were some chapters not open for discussion. And that brings me to another matter, but ministers can also address this. And maybe I wasn't very clear this morning, so this is my chance to make things clear. We will remain below 5% deficit. You'll get all the numbers during the week as provided by parliamentary procedure. We will have a fair budget at below 5% deficit. And the other thing is we were looking for a tax stability, which is not to say that we won't use tools to fight fiscal evasion or tax income over assessment. Some parties are against this, but we believe that the rules must be the same for all taxpayers. Otherwise, consent to paying taxes no longer holds. Anyway, taxes on households will remain the same in 2026 as they were in 2025. All tax instruments on companies, for 99.9% of companies, the instruments will be exactly identical in 2026 as they were in 2025, and that is one of the points of compromise we arrived at with the various political groups. Now, this is sort of a compromise draft, so it's nobody's actual draft, and so this is why we have to call for a vote of confidence on the matter, but we have to explain what's there, what's in that draft. We're, of course, still looking for growth, we're looking for political stability, and indeed political stability will help us there. We'll see this in the days to come. Some visibility on tax matters, and there were lengthy debates in Parliament, and you read all about it in papers, and there were concerns about this, but now we have something that's much more clear. And on the basis of all this, of course, other items will become clarified as we talk to parliamentaries, and the Ministry of Finance will be in touch with the committee rapporteurs. There are still discussions going on a number of issues, but one thing is for sure, it is also for parliamentarians to take on their own responsibilities. Are we going to start a crisis, or after a lengthy effort of compromise, and I think that is the only option we could go through, are we coming out of this long process, or are we going to dive again into a world of risk and uncertainty? Of course, we don't want that, especially at a time when international events are catching up with us, and this, of course, has an effect on domestic policies as well. Now, if you like, I can take your questions now. Prime Minister Sebastien Lecornu, you said yourself you would renege on your promise not to resort to 49.3. Is that your failure, the government's failure, and might this not jeopardize the state's credibility? Well, it's half a success and half a failure. We arrived at a budget for Social Security. Nobody believed this. And the big advantage of this is that at least calm can be restored in political life. But this was a wager. Remember, political forces wanted us to resort to 49.3, and lines have been moving because everybody's arrived at the conclusion that otherwise we're going for a dead end. Now, we don't know the answer now. We'll know in 2 weeks' time whether this is a complete failure or not, because the government's first mission is to provide the nation with a budget. I mean, that is our purpose. And in the many statements I've made, my intention was clear. I had to arrive at a budget, and giving up on 49.3 was one of the conditions. But now we find that it's the other way around. We need 49.3 to arrive at a budget. I'm not being stubborn here. Is it my personal conviction? No, I still believe that a parliamentary democracy should gain maturity, and after a while, eventually you turn to the executive branch, and that is no solution. I've traveled around the world, and I've traveled around Europe, and there are parliamentary democracies we could learn from, perfectly compatible with our own Fifth Republic. I'm a Gaullist. I want to defend the Fifth Republic, but many of those advocating the Fifth Republic are believers but not practitioners. Prime Ministers, this budget you've been concocting with a number of parties, the Socialist Party, the left wing, is that a deal to not arrive at a vote of no confidence? Are you confident that there will be no vote of no confidence against you? And don't you believe that additional debates won't go on for weeks to come? Well, there's no guarantee there. And I don't like partisan talks. I tend to try to keep political parties away from discussions within government. There are no secret deals, backroom deals with political parties. There are technical meetings. There have been technical meetings for weeks. There have been amendments coming from the Parliament, and we find that there's a possible convergence. So what we've been doing since last Friday was to come clean, and before the French people, we come up with a draft budget which to us seems the best for the country, and that is why I took this upon myself. It's true, the Socialist Party had asked to talk, or requested, other political parties as well also had requests. And under the previous government, there were amendments made in favor of laborers, people barely making the minimum wage. We felt that they should get a little boost for purchasing power. That's going the right thing. I'm not saying that we can increase wages every other minute, but we had to make a gesture. Likewise, Gabriel Attal's government wanted social security charges to be reduced to make the cost of labor less expensive, and we did just that. Likewise, there was talk of chasing deals on in the housing industry to make things more easy for landowners, for homeowners. Laurent Wauquiez had his own position, saying that the taxes for households should not increase, and we went along with these ideas as well. There will be no increases on household taxes. But this requires, this sort of work requires a lot of thinking, and calm. But it's all very well when you arrived at a final budget for people to say, oh, but that's you're left-leaning or you're right-leaning. And it's often the same people who never attended the meeting, never took part in the debates. Then suddenly they come up with their criticism, and they run for election as well, and yet they did not participate in that work. Here, we did our homework. We arrive at a text which doesn't run away with tax madness. We have, we do need income for the state. We find that 99.9% of companies are spared by this, and for the remaining companies, we have reduced the tax base, and in fact, any savings are going to help the defense industries. I think we have to be a bit patriotic here. Anyway, this is a compromise text. Nobody wants to sign on to this 100%, so I put this before Parliament, and I call for a vote of confidence on this, because we don't want to make fools of ourselves in front of the whole world. We need to arrive at a budget for the nation. Prime Minister, sir, from France Télévisions. Just now, you said there would be an additional tax for large companies, for corporate income tax, but does not jeopardize the competitiveness of such companies if they are burdened with a higher corporate income tax. And you said that you're going to remain below 5%. What savings are you going to achieve? Well, I'll let my Minister on Public Accounts to say a few words about this. Thank you for this question on savings achieved, and that is an issue that was very much present in our debates. Initially, we had a budget which called for low expenses from the state, and we were able to do this in 2025. This is why we remained with a 5.4% deficit. We completed the year within 300 million of the additional budget, where we're talking about billions here, so we were right on the dot. The Prime Minister confirmed this for 2026. All the budget lines, all the expenses and the income for central government, local authorities, all this will be monitored on a quarterly basis. There will be alert committees whenever we go out of line. And this draft budget to really stick to within 5%, where this shouldn't be only on the shoulders of the ministers. We're doing this in full transparency. Regarding the savings, we savings on operators and agencies, and we'll find that in an hours to come, you'll see that additional savings will be required from a number of public players to improve their cash position. We don't want.
Welcome, you're watching France 24. You've been watching live remarks by the Prime Minister of France, Sebastien Lecornu, and his Finance Minister, Amélie de Montchalin. This after his announcement, which he conceded as a half of a partial admission of failures, is how he put it. They're going to be using Article 49.3 of the Constitution to pass a delayed budget. Let's listen a little bit more to the Finance Minister.
We're also savings on critical items. Public procurement. There were lots of stories in the media, but we're saying that public players have got to buy or pay more for their procurement than they should. We want to save €1 billion right there in public procurement, and that also includes communication expenses. And the savings achieved compared to previous announcements will enable us to remain or keep our expenses below the 5% deficit line. Regarding taxes, and there were quite a few changes since the 14th October draft and the one that we are finalizing right now. There will be no more taxes in tomorrow's draft as the one you had initially. The big difference is that changes were made as to who will be paying more in 2026. Regarding households, there were talks about households, but also pensioners. There were issues of tax shields, etc. Exceptional provisions were removed so as to make sure that the tax effort paid by the nation should remain less in terms of GDP percentage, should be less in 2026 than it was in 2019. 2019 was the last year where we were below 3%. 2019 was the last year before the crisis of inflation, COVID, and Ukraine. We were at 43%. Now we'll be at 43.9% of GDP. So to come back to we want to come back to the last year in our tax history where we were below 3%. You said you're going to be using the reserves, but will there be other savings as well? Well, we have 1.5 billion euros that ministries were hoping they would be able to spend, that they will not be able to spend. And that is very significant. The French have got to understand when we're talking about savings, these are actual savings. We're not just, this is not bookkeeping fantasies. We're talking about real savings there in a few weeks' time. And I'm sure there will be a lot of questions to government in Parliament about this regarding the measures, the provisions that will not be funded. But the self-same people that say we need more savings will be the same people asking for more spending. In what industries, what areas are you talking about? Well, the ministers will tell you more about this, but our commitment is to provide full funding for public services expected by the French. Now, we're moving outside the sort of core system will be savings on operations, on organization, and items that are under the direct supervision of the Prime Minister's office will also come under that savings ban. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone. We could continue with the more formal part of our discussions.
Quand même embrayer sur la question budgétaire dans le sillage de ce qu'a dit le Premier
Since we're discussing the budget here and
par la réaction du président de la République,
Prime Minister and the Public Accounts Minister just spoke, but there will be a vote of confidence asked regarding the present government, and to quote the President and regarding this draft budget that has just been mentioned here.
Cette équation budgétaire,
this budget is the result of a political work which by definition required compromises, concessions on the part of everyone. A budget equation making it possible to keep the deficit below 5%, 5% of GDP, to provide stability and be consistent with our economic policy. So this draft budget will enable the country to move forward. These are the President's words. So we've completed the roadmap. We've got to defend this and to arrive at a positive result. We have items to restart the economy. There were tax incentives for housing. There are a number of items regarding the defense industries and the regalian functions of the government. And we find that you have corporate income tax that will be less.
There you see the French government spokesperson Maud Brejon, flanked by the finance minister Amélie de Montchalin